Okay, good morning. Yesterday we talked about how to find mean, median, and mode utilizing Google Sheets tools. Today we're going to take a look at example 7 and example 8, which are finding weighted means and finding means of grouped data. Very commonly we see these as in the form of a frequency distribution. Let's talk about example 7 here. Almost everybody has had some experience with weighted means at some point. They've taken a class where the teacher weights tests and quizzes and exams and homework differently. So we've all heard at least or had some experience with what a weighted mean is. So here's an example. You're taking a class in which your grade is determined by 5 sources. 50% from your test mean. Remember, mean is another word for average. So 50% from your test average. 15% from the midterms, 20% from a final exam, 10% of your grade from a computer lab, and 5% of the grade is from your homework assignments. So the equation back here for weighted mean, I got this question a lot yesterday from the students who were in class, is what is this funny looking E? That is a Greek letter sigma, and that represents finding the sum of something. So in this case, if we look at this mathematically, we see this x times w in parentheses, indicating that that calculation must be completed first. And after we've completed our multiplication of our x values times our w, which is weights, that we will then take the sum of all of those values. And down here we see that we will take the sum of the weights. So it is completed here for you in this table. We're going to go ahead over to Google Sheets now and take a look at how we could set this up in Google Sheets. And you'll see here that I have copied that table here into my sheet. I've got a column for the score that you had on your particular things. I didn't put a label in of what each of these represented. But we have a column with the score. We have a column with the weights. And we know from our equation that weighted mean means we have to find the sum of x times w and divide by the sum of w, the weight. So the first step we're going to need to do here is we are going to need to calculate x times w. And with the sheet, it's very easy. We could type equals. We could click on the cell with the x value times, click on the cell with the weight, and hit enter, and it will multiply those two values and give us that 43. So from the 86 points that we've scored on our tests, 43 of those will go towards our final grade. Again, nice shortcut with sheets. We can just drag and drop this all the way down. 96 times 0.15 is 14.4. 82 times 0.2, 16.4. We get all of these. Now these are how many points you earn towards your final grade that come from each category. The easiest one to see is you got 100 points on your homework, and that is 5%, so you get 5 points from that. It's the easiest one to see there. But we need to find the sums of these two columns. So we'll use our sheets shortcut, equals sum parenthesis, and we'll just highlight this column. We get the sum of our weights. So we get 1, which makes sense to us. Our percentages, our weights, should add up to 1 or 100%. On this column here, we also want to find the sum of this, equals sum, and we will find the sum of this column, 88.6. Now, we can go ahead and equals this number divided by this number, but we know that we're dividing by 1, so we should still get 88.6 as our final grade. This almost all the time is going to be 1. However, you always want to check this. Example I used in class yesterday was that sometimes, at the end of a semester, the teacher looks back and says, well, you know what? You guys, you have a low average, so I'm going to give you a bonus quiz, and it's going to be worth another 10% of your grade. And so they input an extra quiz here, another 10%, and all of a sudden this number here is not 1 anymore. It's now 1.1. So you always want to double check your weights. If it's divided, if it's 1, you don't have to worry about that division step. But always, always, always double check. Google does have a shortcut for us here. Average weighted, and I'm going to actually adjust that because I believe there's a period in between there. Average weighted, and then you would highlight your x values, place a comma, highlight your weight values, close your parentheses, and hit enter. So we'll go ahead and we'll start typing this, but you'll see it pops up right here, average weighted, weighted average. Okay, so we just click on that, and now we're going to want to highlight our first column of information, comma, highlight our second column of information, and hit enter. And there we go. We got the same score. So either method you would like to use is acceptable. Obviously, with a small data set like this, it's not too difficult to do it the longer way, finding the sums and dividing. But know that both options are there and that you can utilize both options. The next example we want to look at here is what we call means of grouped data, or means of a frequency distribution. Again, we have an equation. Again, we see the symbol for sum. We see x times f. Remember, in a frequency distribution, we have frequencies. We're going to have to talk about what that x stands for in this case. Divided by n. N is how many data points you have, or how many total frequencies you have. If you look over here on the left, you can see the study tip as well. It kind of explains n is the sum of the frequencies. Key thing to point out, I didn't point out yesterday, there are some symbolism differences between populations and samples. We've got this funny shaped U here, or mu, Greek letter. That is the symbol that indicates a population mean, and capital N is our sample or our population size. Whereas this symbol here, X with the line over top that we call X bar, is a sample mean, and lowercase n is your sample size. Some symbolic differences in representation. Realistically, for mean, there is no difference between the equations for population mean or sample mean. There's a guidelines box here. I encourage you to write it down. Writing it down will help you to remember the steps to this. We're going to go through these steps, finding the midpoint of each class, find the sum of the products. So find the products of x times f, then find the sum of the frequencies, then divide. We're going to go through all those steps in Google Sheets. So the example here starts us off with this. Now this goes back to example number 1 in a previous section, section 2.1, where we first started building frequency distributions. And I don't want to go ahead and click all the way back to it right now, but this goes back to example number 1. And what I've done here in my Google Sheet is, instead of, need to move some, there we go. Instead of giving you the midpoints like they did in that example, so this is what they gave you in the example, I've gone ahead and given you the classes. So this was example number 1, section 2.1. We created these classes from 7 to 18, 19 to 30, 31 to 42. And we counted out these frequencies, 6, 10, 13, 8, 5, 6, 2. Our equation to find mean of a frequency distribution has this x in here. And you need to know this. The x represents the midpoints, and the f represents the frequencies. Here's the problem with a frequency distribution. When we look at a frequency distribution, we know that this first group goes from 7 to 18. And we know that 6 of those data points fall into that group, but we don't know what their actual value was. If you had the data set, you could go through and find them, but right now we don't have that. So all we know is that there's 6 data values that fall between 7 and 18, and we don't know if they're all 7s or all 18s or a mix of anything in between. So what we do is we make this assumption that all of those are the midpoint. We take the middle of that class and we say every single one of these data points is a 12.5. Every single one of these 10 is a 24.5. So we calculate these midpoints, and our next step was, if you're finding an average, you add up all the data points. So you could type into your calculator something like 12.5 plus 12.5 plus 12.5. And you could do that 6 times. And then you could type 24.5 in 10 times and 36.5 in 13 times. But that's going to be really, really time consuming to set up a data set with all 50 of these values. We have a shortcut for that in mathematics. It's called multiplication. Instead of adding something 6 times, we just do what we call multiplication. So instead of doing 12.5 addition 6 times, we're going to do 12.5 times 6. And again, we use our shortcut to do this, equals cell E2 times cell F2, and it gives us that multiplication, which we can then drag and drop. So instead of typing these data points in all of these times, why not just take the shortcut and multiply them? Okay. The next step in our equation says find the sum of the x times f column and divide it by the sum of the frequencies. And I've typed that in down here. Mean equals sum of x times f divided by n. And we could type it in that way. Equals sum of this information. And we can divide that by the sum of this information. And we can get the correct answer there. If you think about it, the calculation to find mean of a frequency distribution, this x column times another column, find the sums of both and divide, is really the same calculation that we did over here for weighted mean. We multiplied our two columns and divided the sums of each column. It's exactly the same, mathematically speaking, calculation. The symbolism is different, but the steps are the same. So we can actually use our, forget the equal sign, average weighted formula to get our weighted mean. It will work out the same because mathematically the steps are the same. So there's some shortcuts there you can use that will make finding weighted means and frequency distribution means a little bit faster. I hope it was helpful. I hope it helps you out with the assignment problems for today. And thanks for stopping by and listening.